Start talking with University of Tampa here. All right, so thank you everybody for your patience as we got the phone situation worked out there. We had some people join through the Lync client with computer audio, and we have some people on the voice line. So we appreciate everybody's patience as we got that voice line set up. So I know we're getting a little bit of a late start, but we should still be able to wrap up around the same time. This was scheduled from 1:30 to 2:30 Eastern time. I appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to join. And I especially want to thank the University of Tampa. I'm here with two folks, which I'll introduce in just a moment, and definitely want to thank them for taking time as well. So the purpose of this webcast is the University of Tampa over the summer, specifically in July, had migrated their faculty and staff email from on-premise Exchange 2003 to Office 365. And so we thought it would be a good idea, based on their experience, to share what that experience was like with some other schools out there that are probably looking at the same thing. Just to let you know, the University of Tampa also has Live at EDU right now for their students. So they're using Microsoft Cloud Services to provide email for really all of your users, right? Correct. So before we jump in too deeply here, I just want to take a moment to introduce the folks that I'm with here. First of all, I've got Tracey Potter here with me. She's the Director of Network Services with Information Technology here at the University of Tampa. You want to say hello?
Hello.
So thank you for joining, Tracey. I appreciate it. And I'm also happy to say that I've got Jay Langdock here as well, also, of course, with the University of Tampa, and he's a senior network systems admin, and obviously, of course, in infrastructure technology. And I'm going to be the one who doesn't really provide too much useful information on this call. I'm with B2B. I'm the education development manager with B2B. So I had the great fortune of working with the University of Tampa on this project, and of course we have a whole team at B2B who really did the heavy lifting as far as supporting their migration. So certainly want to thank them as well. To keep things moving along here, I'll just briefly go through our agenda. We've got about 305 slides we've got to get through in 45 minutes. Actually, we're going to try and not bore you with slides. We're going to try and keep this fairly conversational. I will ask that we hold questions off until the end, or we might pause at specific points to see if there are any questions. But just for the sake of keeping everything moving along here, we'll probably set aside specific time to answer questions. So we're just going to walk through. I want to hear a bit about what the University of Tampa's previous environment was like, what some of the drivers were for choosing Office 365. Why was the timing right for them to make that move? And then we'll get into the migration itself. And there's a number of different decisions that you want to make as far as identity management goes, or integration, whether you're going to maintain some Exchange servers on-premise, for instance, and do a hybrid scenario. So there's a number of different decision points that you come across as you're doing this migration. So we'll talk in detail about what the University of Tampa did here. And then probably most important and most useful for people on this call is just hearing from the University of Tampa, any advice that they might have, some recommendations if they ran into any gotchas. So those are the things that we'll cover here. So to begin, I was wondering if you could just tell me about your previous environment and where things were prior to this.
We were hosting our faculty, staff, and departmental emails on Microsoft Exchange 2003 servers. We had a co-location site to where we were replicating our email servers to the colo site with a product from a company called SteelEye called LifeKeeper. And we have about 2,000 accounts. And our goal was we were either going to upgrade to Microsoft Exchange 2010 or go to Office 365. That was our goal.
Right, and we'll talk about some of the reasons there too. I know that there were a couple of some very specific challenges that you were facing that drove that. And Jay, I know that you helped get set up on the Live at EDU for the students, and you're going to continue using that, correct?
Yes, we are. We're going to keep the students on Live at EDU until they get migrated over to Office 365 as part of that Microsoft project for doing that.
Right, right. And we have a number of other schools on the call today that I know are in that same situation where they have Live at EDU deployed and are looking down the road here at making that transition to Office 365. So I know that you've made some decisions at least around what that might look like, and we might talk about that later. So I just want to get into now some of the challenges that really were driving this decision, and why was the timing right? Why did you do this now?
When users were hosted on premise on our Exchange servers, we needed to keep their mailboxes at a very small size so that we could make sure the synchronization happened with our colo site and to manage our backups. And our users now need more space to store their email was a driving factor. We were also looking at changing our DR model. We were looking to replace our ERP system, and our provider actually offers services, so we were looking for a different DR model and looking at cloud options for our email.
Right.
The other part of it is the web access to our email was the 2003 version, and it was very limited, and our users did not really like the web Outlook experience. So, and the last part of it on the slide is about that you had to VPN in to get access to your email if you weren't here on campus.
So a couple of things there just that you pointed out, just to reiterate. The timing kind of aligned with your decision to make to move to this new ERP system, and so at the same time your disaster recovery strategy was changing, and this was a great way to resolve that for the email for faculty and staff and not have to look at a different solution for that in particular. So, as my understanding, that was probably the big driver there. But of course, the mailbox restriction size, having to back up, I mean, that's something that a lot of the clients that we work with are familiar with. And you point out the frustration that users have with the PST files and having to do their own archives and the training and support and other things that are involved there. So, needless to say, there's, I'm sure a lot of people are having familiar scenarios here.
Yeah. From an administrative side, we had issues with PST files as well. Scanning my file servers on the home directories, 40% of all storage space taken up was people archiving PST files.
Oh, right, sure. So, and that brings us, of course, to Office 365. And my slides are a little bit delayed here, but as we move over to Office 365. If we do have people who are on the phone, we're hearing some voices come through, so if it would be possible to mute your line, that would be helpful. So I just want to talk a little bit about why you chose Office 365. I understand that, on one hand, it's probably pretty obvious given the environment that you're on and so much Microsoft. You were working with Microsoft already, but beyond that, I do know that you were evaluating other solutions at any time you make this kind of change. So, did you want to talk a little bit about what some of the decision points were there?
We were looking at the compatibility with different applications as far as it does fully utilize Microsoft Office products. Certainly, the size of the mailbox that they were offering to us is certainly a huge benefit to our users. Our users are very happy about having a 25 gig of space for their email. The other things that we were looking at are the Lync Online and the SharePoint capabilities. We knew they were coming, and now they're available. The ability to use our same username and password, our Active Directory username and password for access, the ability to do from our user's perspective, a seamless migration played into the decision factors with it.
Sure.
Our students were already on Live at EDU, so a similar platform, they're using Microsoft, faculty and staff using Microsoft, played into the decision factor.
Right. And so just a question, this is something that I had at the point that you were just making this decision for to move faculty and staff to Office 365, were your sights on the fact that you probably eventually be moving students that direction as well?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, clearly it's still Exchange Online either way, but I was just wondering if you were having those considerations at that point as well. So, Jay, anything to add there? Anything in particular that you saw that stood out? I know that you're on the management side and are familiar working with Microsoft technologies in general. So I don't know if there was something in particular that.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, working with Microsoft, most of our infrastructure is Microsoft. So with transitioning to cloud-based services, it's a little bit of a challenge for me from an administrative standpoint of giving up some things, but the familiarity with Microsoft products and Exchange already, and how to manage those products.
Sure. So we talked about email, and email is really the primary driver here. I think when we talk about what the roadmap is for the University of Tampa, a few slides away here, we'll get more into some of the other components. I do just want to pause briefly, though. I'm sure that most people who are on this call already have an idea, but these are just some of the the stats and details here about what the service does offer and what you're looking at in the future. We've actually been talking quite a bit this morning about Lync and some of the different possibilities there, which I know is something that is being looked at and evaluated here at the University of Tampa. So you mentioned the large mailbox size, obviously compatibility across different clients. One thing that is interesting, I think I actually have this on a slide somewhere later, but I thought it was really interesting about the Mac users and how that was specifically frustrating, I guess, in the Exchange 2003 environment because the Outlook web access was kind of the best way to do it. So how are you working with the Macs now?
We have upgraded them to the Office 2011 version for Macs, so they have the full client experience with Outlook now, but they also use the Outlook web, and it's very similar to your client experience. So we have users, finally going just to the web to get to their email. So they're not always, and that works out very well for our faculty because they're not in their office. They're teaching classes, and in between they can quickly go check their email and not need to VPN or do any other thing to get to it.
Right. And a lot has changed in that Office web app that makes it a much more viable way to work with your mail here. So some of the other pieces here that we'll talk about a little bit again later, I just want to make sure that people are aware. The three components are, of course, Exchange-based email hosted by Microsoft in their data centers with 25 gigabytes of email, but also Lync Online, which provides instant messaging and voice and video calls. It's actually what we're using right now for this conference, which is, despite the audio issues that were on our end here at B2B, it's a really compelling way to meet with groups of people the way we are here, and work with people remotely. We work with many of our clients that way, and we see a lot of schools who are using this for different approaches to distance learning, or just in a more ad hoc way to collaborate with students and peers. So that component's in there as well. And then, of course, there's SharePoint Online, which is hosted collaboration websites where people can store documents and easily work together with documents. And if you're familiar with Live at EDU and SkyDrive, that was on Live at EDU, whereas that was just sort of just storage in the cloud that was managed by the individual user. This is more of an enterprise environment. If you're not familiar with SharePoint, you can manage this from a permissions perspective and have a lot of control over how people use the site and what it looks like and those types of things. And it does much more than just store documents too. A little bit off topic for this conversation, because like most of the clients we work with, the university is really focused on email. That's the primary driver here, the biggest expense and the best way to minimize complexity and cost. So with that, I just want to get into some of the different decisions that you made. And I like to break these down into three specific areas, really: identity management and authentication. So, you have faculty and staff and Active Directory. How are you using that today? What decisions you made as far as migrating mailbox content. I think that's going to be interesting for a lot of people who also have large mailboxes that they need to move. And then that ties in with the integration here as well. So we'll just jump right in with the identity and account provisioning piece. So this is a slide that I've stolen directly from Microsoft, but I think that it really does help people to understand the differences between what you have with Live at EDU and what some of the options are. And you can really boil it down to three different scenarios. First is this separate sign-on. And we're going to talk about that, I think, here in a moment. But separate sign-on, this is really where you're asking your users to maintain a separate set of credentials with the Microsoft platform. There's no real integration with any directory on-premise or anything like that. Like with Live at EDU, you have directory synchronization, which you can do, which push usernames and account changes up to the cloud and keep those two directories in synchronization. But what I think is most pertinent here is the ability to actually federate the two environments. And so I know that you aren't doing Live at EDU that way, but when you saw Office 365, how much of a driver was that federation?
We insisted that we would federate with Office 365 because we want the users to use their same username and password and want to manage that here. At the University of Tampa. Now, our Live at EDU for our students, they use a separate sign-on, and the reason they use a separate sign-on is we've offered them lifetime email. So once you have we have a separate domain for the student email, and once they get an email address, they can keep that forever. And we do not want to keep their Active Directory accounts in our domain controllers after they graduate from the university. So that's why we made that decision. But for our faculty, staff, and departmental accounts, we want that fully integrated with our Active Directory to make it one less username and password. I don't know if other schools are the same, but we still have multiple passwords, and our model has been to point things towards our Active Directory username database.
And that's that's definitely a common scenario with a lot of schools. One of the big benefits is being able to provide that lifetime email. And so I think that having students doing sort of the separate sign-on and maintaining their accounts while faculty and staff are using the federation with Active Directory is a mix we're going to see quite a bit of. Now, what sort of considerations though with Active Directory? Because when you're federating, you have people actually still coming in and they're actually logging on through your server. So even though the email is hosted, so Jay, were you concerned about redundancy, and what sort of decisions did you make there? Did you run into any other problems with the federation?
Yeah, we were very concerned with redundancy, trying to make sure if you're federated and your ADFS proxy server goes down, nobody's getting in the email, nobody's getting anywhere.
Right.
What we did is we've got two separate virtual infrastructures. I put an ADFS proxy and an ADFS server in each environment. So if I had catastrophic failure in one environment, the other one was still up and running, and put a load balancer in front of those two. We also have a DR site up in Cincinnati, and I've got ADFS and ADFS proxy server running up there, and they're all set up in a farm. So.
Right. And so that's a really different consideration when you're comparing that to directory synchronization. Obviously, if the directory synchronization server goes down, there might be some disconnect there, but this way nobody's logging in. So certainly that's something that people are concerned with, but the benefits are, clearly justify that. So just quickly here. I won't go into details about describing the federation. I think that everybody on this call is probably pretty clear. But the idea is that they're logging in, getting authenticated by your local Active Directory here, and then that trust is shared with Office 365. So no passwords are actually being stored in the cloud. So it's a more secure environment as well for that reason. But again, if they can't get onto your network and they can't be authenticated through your Active Directory, they definitely need to do that in order to access their mail. So what were, you said that earlier, Tracey, that you insisted on the federation, and were there particular reasons for that? It was, you wanted people to use the mail, like you said, and single sign-on helps with that. Were there other benefits that you had on either the IT admin side or?
Well, you do want one username and one user database to maintain.
Right.
Was one of the deciding factors. They previously were using their domain credentials to get to their emails. We didn't have to teach them new ones, of course, and we don't want to add another username and password to the scheme of things. And we wanted to move migrate what they already have to Office 365.
Right.
So we were making, an assumption at that point that we really need to be federated to make sure that can happen.
Right, and so that's true. It does set the stage for that integration with the on-premise Exchange environment that you had in place here to help with the migration of content. And I think the support is a big issue. The password resets and things like that. You have one database to manage. So Jay, anything else there?
Yeah, it's a lot of it from a management standpoint. With federating and using DirSync, being able to still manage distribution lists in-house and push those up to the cloud and have all of that managed locally versus two environments where you're trying to administer,
Sure, that makes sense. Absolutely. So with that, I just want to we'll move ahead and we'll talk about the migrating mailbox content since this sort of sets the stage for it. So we have our users set up there, and this is my fun little smart art graphic that I have to play around with. So sorry if this is hard for anybody to read here, but I did have some fun with this. But really what it comes down to is you have two decisions that you could make. Now, you were on Exchange 2003, and so the options before you were to do a flash cutover, which was to move directly from Exchange 2003, move everybody at once to Office 365, and then shut down the Exchange 2003 servers. The other option, and the one that you ultimately went with, is to sort of a phased migration by implementing coexistence between Exchange on-premise and Office 365. Now we'll talk about Exchange 2003 here in a moment, what that means. But what were some of the considerations that went into that? Was around the timing?
The amount of downtime that we anticipated that would be required to do the flash cutover was a major. We can't afford that much downtime, so that almost rolled it out just on that. But the other, probably almost as close to that, would be that it did not get all the components of your email, so it wasn't going to get your calendars. It wouldn't get all the
delegation stuff. Task lists were in there.
And it wasn't a clean as a migration. And doing the phased coexistence bought us that we could do it at our convenience once we set it up, and it got everything. It got all your contacts, your calendars, all the delegations. It got almost everything we needed. There was a couple things it did not migrate over, such as if you had forward set up, it did not move your forward, but we knew that, and so we could communicate with our users to tell them that you have to go in and set up a redirect with your forwards. But we at least could tell that and knew that at the time.
So migration is certainly one advantage here, and I understand that with the exception of things like your ERP system and some other things that need email sending capabilities, you're not really managing mailboxes on premise here for faculty and staff, yet you are keeping that hybrid environment up. And Jay, I was wondering, there's some administrative benefits there?
Yeah, I mean, from a management standpoint, having the Exchange server to be able to create mailboxes on premise and then migrate them up, even new accounts that we get, they're created on site and then migrated up. And for the back-end systems and departmental accounts that send large volumes of email, to get past the 1,500 email limit,
right.
We're using the Exchange 2010 on-premise server. basically as a mail relay, and reconfiguring specific departmental clients to go through that, and then back-end systems that either send high volumes of email or that cannot authenticate with TLS against Office 365, can authenticate against the on-premise server.
Right, right. So yeah, those management capabilities are certainly one of the reasons why we see a lot of people go coexistence, even if they do plan to move, all of the accounts at once. So I did just want to make one point here, which is that in case anybody on the phone isn't aware, you can't really federate Exchange 2003 directly with the cloud, so you really had to stage the environment. You mentioned, Jay, that you had Exchange 2010 server on premise here, but you did start with Exchange 2003 server. And just to minimize the downtime, right? Because with this, you have no other option than to do a flash cutover to go over to move to Office 365. So you put an Exchange server here in place, and that really just functioned as a staging server at that point, and then eventually took the role of SMTP relay and things like that.
Yeah, right? We actually stood up a second Exchange 2010 server. So we had the hybrid server and stood up another server basically solely as a staging server. So it had a database on it, and we actually migrated the accounts from 2003 to the staging server and then up from the staging server.
Right, all right. And the benefits there, of course, are you're using your local network here for to minimize that downtime from 2003 to 2010, and then with that coexistence, this is more or less transparent to the users as you're pushing mail from Exchange 2010 up to Office 365. So we've already really talked about the integration here. So again, you have this hybrid approach that you have set up today, and I think the important thing to understand is that it's really around the management aspects of it, and that's why you're using it. And then we'll talk about, I think, PowerShell here. One of the benefits there is you get to use that user interface and manage the Exchange server in the cloud as if it was on-premise there, and like you mentioned, that for provisioning accounts. So we'll just jump right through here because I do want to have plenty of time for some questions here as we go. And so the last thing that not quite the last thing, close to the last thing that I want to focus on here is really any sort of advice, recommendations. What are some of the gotchas you faced? Because I know that there were some, right? Mm-hmm. We can pretend everything was completely rosy and there was never any any issue or any surprise decisions that you had to make, but I know that's not the case. And the purpose of this call, of course, is to help people be more prepared and know what to expect. So I've got a list of them here. We don't have to stick to the list. These are some of the things that we had talked about, but this might help to prompt you. But I was wondering if we could, talk about some of those here. So one of the things in particular that you mentioned was more time. Right? You think you know how long it's going to take, but you don't account for some of the process things. So you want to talk about that?
Well, our process, once we got the migration and the hybrid, the coexistence set up where we had the staging server set up and our hybrid server set up, and we had configured all the routing and the connectors to work so that while we were migrating mailboxes, mail could be delivered and received regardless of whether your mailbox was on the Exchange 2003 box still, whether we had moved it to the staging server, whether it was on the hybrid server, whether it was on Office 365, mail could all be delivered. So what we told our users and communicated with them is we moved small chunks of them in the evening after business hours. So we moved 50 to 75 users per night. We also had to look at our Mac users because when we moved them, then they only had access to OWA until we could go and upgrade them to the Office version 2011 that would work with Exchange 2010. So we moved them in 50 to 75 at a time, so we could spread out the migration and deal with help desk issues and things as they came up. We didn't have a lot of issues, but we did have some people that needed to be upgraded the next day and some issues. So as far as the stretching it out over time, that was a big help to us so we could manage it with the staff that we had. So by doing the hybrid setup and migrating the mailbox to an on-premise server, then moving it up to the cloud, that managed the time that we told the users to log off at the end of the business day. By the next morning, their mail was up and running, and they were on Office 365, and they were ready to go.
And Jay, you had pointed out something about that as well, that with the hybrid, enabling the mailboxes using the on-premise server, makes it a lot easier if you need to move those back on-premise for any reason. So.
Yeah, just and that's some of the things kind of learned as I was going along and reading this and reading that about it. Just that it's if you keep that hybrid server and create the accounts on site and migrate them up, because it only takes maybe a couple minutes. There's no mail in the mailbox.
Right.
It's a whole lot easier if for any reason, whether it's you just want that mailbox off of Office 365 or for e-discovery purposes or anything like that. It's cleaner to move it back from Office 365 back to on-premise if it originated on-premise in the first place.
Right, that makes sense. And one other thing, a little bit off topic here, but you had mentioned earlier that one of the benefits of having that on-premise server is being able to manage the distribution list and those types of things. But I do understand that didn't quite pan out the way that you were doing it prior to this.
No, we had dynamic distribution lists based on faculty, adjuncts, staff, students, some different things. And those were based off of our OU structure. So if an account was in a specific OU, it would get, an email sent out to it. Office 365, that is not part of DirSync. They don't understand your OU structure. So we actually had to do a quick turn on how to manage our, sending global emails or to the entire university community and using the custom attributes, the Exchange custom attributes. So we set aside custom attribute 1 and set up dynamic distribution lists based on what was in that field, whether somebody is labeled as a student, faculty, staff, adjunct, or we have one that is, if it's any of these things, it goes, so it'll get out to the entire university community.
So a different approach than before, but it doesn't sound like which is a different way of thinking and having to recreate those dynamic lists. You had mentioned something too that I might have just washed over for people who haven't spent some time looking at this, which is that DirSync is a part of the ADFS, that to do the federation, you do use the DirSync to create the accounts and push those accounts up while federation maintains the authentication piece of it. So it's worth pointing that out. One thing I like that you had mentioned when we were planning for this, Jay, was PowerShell. And yeah, I mean, you like to go out and you learn these things. Clearly, I think you said earlier you're a little obsessive compulsive about really needing to maintain your servers and stuff. And you ran into some things with PowerShell there as you went exploring, right?
Yeah, it's I'd done some with PowerShell. You can read about it, but until you're actually in the shell and working with it every day, it's it's like a light bulb went off at one point where, oh, okay, that's when you're typing commands in, a light bulb kind of goes off as to how things are structured, with PowerShell commands and why they're structured that way. And I love PowerShell now.
Right.
I never go into the command prompt, even if I'm doing stuff that I would normally do in the command prompt. My first instinct is to open up PowerShell at this point.
Great. So yeah, definitely PowerShell is something you want to learn about here as you go. So I think we've hinted at this a bit throughout the call, but just as we wrap some things up. So your exchange online today with faculty and staff. You've got your students on live at EDU. One thing I know that you're looking at is the Lync online. Are there any specific details about where you are in that process or what you might be considering time?
Well, we're just coming up from air from the beginning of the
Right,
semester,
sure.
and we had the RNC visit Tampa, so that made us really busy. So we're just getting ready to look at the Lync online and the SharePoint piece of it
Right.
as well. So we have not, and we just renewed our licenses, so that part came with our renewed licenses. When we first went, those two components were not included with it.
Gotcha.
So.
And of course, somewhere down the road here, you're going to be making that transition for the students, moving them from Live at EDU to Office 365. And just to highlight again, one of the things that we discussed was the fact that you're using separate sign-on there so that they can maintain those email addresses easily, and you don't have to keep them in your Active Directory for however long their lifetime happens to be. I'm going to do sort of shameless plug here as well, and just ask you about working with a partner, and specifically with B2B in this case. And there's really sharp people here. What really drove that decision? What was that experience like, and for you?
Working with B2B has been a wonderful experience. They helped us determine which path that was best for UT to go on. We did a proof of concept with B2B on a test domain. We set up ADFS with B2B, and we actually set up our migration and decommissioning with B2B. Their people were absolutely wonderful. The people we worked with were very knowledgeable, and a lot of the things that we were doing with this, it would be very difficult to try to test it before you did it, and we relied heavily on B2B to make sure that we weren't putting our system at risk, that I had ample opportunity to communicate any changes that we needed to tell our users. There was at one point that our Mac users, we had to give them a new URL to get to their Outlook web, and it was still on 2003, so they could still work until we migrated them, and those things just fell into place. So it was a very, we couldn't have done it without B2B, without taking like tons more time to figure it out. They do this all the time, and the engineers that we worked with and the people that helped us were just absolutely wonderful. We'd work with them anytime on any project. Well, it was great.
And we certainly appreciate that. I think the key thing that you said there too is that this is not something that you or many universities or districts out there are having to do on a regular basis and move from one email platform to another. And so when you're doing things like setting up the federation, it's something that you do once and then you maintain it. So the benefit of working with the partners there is key, because we are
You're helping people every day.
Yeah, that's right. We're doing these a lot. So.
I would say one of the big things for me was being somebody that's come from the corporate world into education and seeing how IT works differently in both spaces. The fact that B2B has experience with education, which is a lot of times a completely different animal than the corporate world as far as working through projects and how things have to flow with faculty and those types of things.
Right. And we're a little unique there too, in that education represents a large part of our client base and the business that we do. So we've worked a long time with Live at EDU too, so we're looking ahead at those transitions and what that looks like. So at this point, we do have a few minutes left here, and I'm certainly happy to stick around a few minutes over as well to answer any questions that people may have. I believe Jennifer might have the call on mute here, so I might ask her to take that call off of mute, but also feel free to type in your questions in the messaging box, or if you're on the phone to ask a question there as well. As we go into the questions, I just want to again thank Tracey and Jay for taking some time out to talk with everybody here and letting us record this and help others get familiar with some of the decisions you made and understand how that might play into their own migration as they look forward to it. So thank you very much. So with that, do we have any questions from the people on the line?
ADFS handle that on the back end on its own.
Absolutely. In your situation without that.
So we're having some bandwidth limitations here and getting some choppy audio. I'm going to stop the presentation, but we'll still stay on the call here just to see if I can save some bandwidth and hear people better.
Okay. It looks like Walt uploaded.
Okay, I do. I see Walt's question there. What type of training was needed? And we actually talked about this, and I failed to mention it, so this is a great question. What type of training did you provide for the users as they moved from Exchange 2003 to Office 365?
We put some information on our portal that we have, but it was very minimal training. We sent some communications. The big thing that we needed to communicate is Office 365 has some limitations to it. The biggest one that we paid attention to and kept repeating to our users was the limit of 1,500 messages per day, because you have some people across the campus that need to be able to send to all of our students, and our enrollment's over 7,000 now. So we told them that we allow them to SMTP relay out through our on-premise hybrid server is how we work around that. But we want to limit those people because of the DR implications. Because if that server here locally is down, then they can't have that functionality until we bring it up at our DR site. So, but we still, even today, our users did not give it enough thought, because there's just certain times of the year that different people are sending out large amounts of email, and it won't happen until whatever event needs to take place, like financial aid. They got caught, and with Microsoft, if your mailbox is on Office 365 and you hit the 1,500 limit, you're waiting 24 hours to send more messages out. It's a hard limit, and they will not do anything to fix it.
I try and send out 1,500 messages every day by like 10 a.m.
So I can't
get anything else.
But we have been able to work with our users, and we think we have most of them. It's very limited to the people. We're only offering the special configuration and telling people how to do it when they ask us. So that's the way we've been dealing with it.
So,
but very little training, to answer your question. We put information on our portal, and we communicated with them via email, but we didn't need to tell them too much.
And they had already been using Exchange and pretty familiar with it. So.
And Outlook, they were very familiar with Outlook.
Yeah, all of our users are on Outlook, so the transition for them was pretty seamless. I think the biggest benefit was going from VPNing into the network to actually connect to your Exchange client, to firing it up wherever you are and having auto discover and Outlook anywhere. And even for me, from my standpoint, that was huge. The first night I was at home after my mailbox was, I think, the first mailbox to migrate over, and went home that night and fired up my laptop, and it's a whole lot nicer to just open up Outlook rather than have to VPN into the network before you do that. And on a note, with the accounts that send 1,500 emails, even though we configure them to redirect through the on-premise Exchange server, we still have their mailbox on Office 365. So they're configured to receive email looking at Office 365, but outgoing mail comes through the SMTP server.
Gotcha. We have a follow-up question, it looks like, from Walt here as well, which is, are you subscribing to any other additional services beyond the what's provided in the A2 education plan of Office 365? There's things like archiving and that provide e-discovery.
Yes, we are doing Exchange Plan 2, the archiving with the e-discovery capabilities. We have implemented that as well. So what that gives us is every user gets 25 gig of space. When you buy you do have to pay for it. It's not a free part for EDU. But when you get the Exchange Plan 2, you get another 100 gig of archiving space.
So along those lines, I was wondering how much compliance played into this. Is that having the mailboxes off-site versus on-prem? Did you run into any specific compliance concerns there?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sure. I heard UC Davis mention that that's one of their requirements?
One of the things we did run into as far as the e-discovery and, if you're doing journaling, it technically will work, but is not supported to journal to an Office 365 mailbox. So there is, I did find some ways around that without having to get a third-party solution on setting up retention policies. And one of those was we basically set, when somebody clears something out of their deleted items folder, that policy we set, was it 3 years? 3 years, I believe. So even though it's not there, it's still kind of there, since you don't have the ability to journal without, getting a third-party solution.
The other thing with archiving that we ran into is that with Office 365, you have the capability, there's a forward capability and a redirect, and to make sure you have the e-discovery capabilities, we had to turn off the forwarding and explain to our users how to set up a redirect. It's the same thing from the user's perspective, but Microsoft calls it a redirect versus a forward. So we did have to send out a special communications to explain how the redirect works.
All right. Any other questions? I don't see any in the instant messaging window here. I thought I heard somebody might try and jump in on the call. All right. It doesn't sound like we have any more questions at this point.
If you don't mind. I'm actually pretty interested in like your guys' whole migration pathway. Like I said, again, Jake, BC Davis. So were there any other, you could say you guys basically migrated from 2003 and then jumped into Office 365 all in the same year or over the summer?
We set up our environment I think it was set up in April, and our environment was that we moved the box from Exchange 2003 to a Office 365 staging server, which was a Exchange 2010 box, to the hybrid server to the Office 365, up to the cloud, was the migration path that we put in. So we were moving it along in the process.
But it was only those mailboxes that were being migrated at that point to Office 365 that were on that Exchange 2010 box.
Yes.
At any point, right? So
yes.
it's kind of phased to the 2010 environment.
Yes.
And they pretty much, I mean, we had them immediately make that jump. We migrated them from 2003 to the 2010 on-prem. As soon as those accounts made it over there, we cleared the move request and generated a remote move request and pushed them right up to Office 365. We didn't leave them on the staging server.
Gotcha.
Night.
Okay, and then what about your guys' DNS? Did you implement all the auto discover records, etc., to go along to make the client side experience a little?
Yes, we did auto discover, and it worked out famously, especially for our mobile devices. A lot of the newer mobile devices, we still have people using some older devices, but the newer ones, it made it very easy for you to go in and we told our users to remove their profile off their phone and put it back in there, and most of our users were able to reconnect. There were some that were not, and we had to help them, our help desk helped them figure out how to do it. They actually had to go get the name of which server they ended up on Office 365. But Microsoft does have a link on their, I think it's on Outlook.com, I think. No, I can't remember the URL, but I can find it. That has exactly, like by device, how you set it up to use Office 365, and I put a link to that on our portal, and that has helped our users, help themselves, basically.
Right, and that's actually available through the Outlook Web Access client. If you go to the help there, there's some pretty good guidance there about setting up all kinds of clients, and like Tracey mentioned, all the mobile devices, by device, by what operating system they're using. One thing that's just worth pointing out is in those cases where you're using like a non-active sync client on a phone and you do need to get that server address, it's actually fairly easy to discover that from Outlook Web Access as well. I think you go to like the About piece under Help, and it'll show you exactly what your server name is, and there's some guidance to get you there.
Sure. Have you guys had any struggles with administration? I guess you obviously haven't managed 2010 Exchange all that long, but it's my understanding that the PowerShell library is pretty limited in the the Exchange Online versus on-prem. There's some things you can or can't do. Have you had any administrative issues?
No, not a whole lot. Probably mostly because our Exchange server on premise is, it's pretty much for, getting the account created in the mailbox and then just pushing it right up. So most of the PowerShell I've done with it has been directly against Office 365.
Gotcha.
And it can take a little bit of work to figure out exactly, what commandlets you're needing to run and figuring that out. But I've found for the most part that it's my understanding that the library is fairly limited compared to what you can do with Exchange 10. So there's some things like for instance, exporting command line to PST. If, not that it would happen, but if you have a corrupt mailbox or whatever, there are certain limitations to the PowerShell infrastructure. And I just wondered if you guys had ran into any roadblocks that you were like, that's weird. I gotta find a workaround for it, Not so much limitations. Some of the commandlets are a little bit different. So, if you're using a git command, for whatever it may be, just the syntax may be a little bit different when you're doing it against Office 365 than against Exchange 2010. I can't remember off the top of my head. There was a couple commands I was trying to run just to get some information for my own curiosity, and I found it. Going against Exchange 2010, I found something somebody had put out there, and it wasn't the same for Office 365.
Sure. Yeah. What about some of your mobile users, or well, obviously MacMail doesn't work with it at all, correct?
What's that?
Like for your Mac.
Oh, for MacMail?
MacMail doesn't work.
I thought that was ActiveSync.
I don't think MacMail's ActiveSync.
Yeah, I don't think MacMail works with it. We use Microsoft Office 2011, so now they're on full-blown Outlook. They were on Entourage, but Entourage doesn't talk to Exchange 2010, so we had to wait to upgrade them to the Outlook 2011 until after we migrated them. So we told our Mac users that when they were migrated, you have to go to Web Outlook to get to your mail until we upgrade you, until you bring in your computer and set up a time to get it upgraded. Because we have to touch our Macs. We don't have anything to push stuff to them yet. We're looking at some things, but we can't push to the Macs at this point.
Yeah, we actually ran into some issues recently with, especially with some of the latest iterations of.
Did we lose him?
I'm not sure. You might have dropped off there.
Because I know Microsoft throttles pretty heavily on EWS.
Right. We missed some of that, but.
Sorry, I can type it in if you like.
Sure. If there's a specific question, definitely type it in. We'll see it that way. Sorry, it's a bandwidth thing on our end here. And So any issues with EWS throttling?
Yeah. So Exchange Web Services is what even Outlook 2011 uses it to communicate with Exchange, and I know Microsoft throttles it pretty hard. So have you guys had any complaints from Mac users that the performance is degraded after moving it there?
I have not heard of any, and typically since we've migrated, any email issues have gone very quickly through the help desk directly to me, unfortunately. So I would think I would have heard something if they were having issues. So not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And I was just at a faculty meeting yesterday with we have a IT faculty group committee that meets, and they didn't mention that as anything about that. And the majority of our Mac users are faculty members. So I haven't heard either.
Us as well. Yeah, we're pretty much everybody's faculty at our place, for sure. Well, that's good to hear. I'm actually really excited. I've been architecting a fairly large implementation of this, so it's good to hear that another university is having a good response with it and that it's working out well.
Well, great. And this is David again with B2B, and
your folks that you brought in did a pretty good job for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we appreciate that, and if you have any questions for us, definitely shoot me an email.
Sure.
And we can, and I'm sure I'll volunteer Tracey and Jay here as well if you have additional follow-up questions. I'm sure that they'd be happy to talk with you. If you want to hear the real scoop on B2B when we're not on the line, you can talk to her directly to get that. At any rate, I think what I'll do is I'm going to stop the recording here and just thank anybody who's still left on the line. I'm not going anywhere. I'm happy to stick around. I think Tracey does have another meeting there. I see another message is being typed in, so we'll wait for that to.
Yeah, I'm just gonna throw my email out, and if you guys could touch base, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I'll take that down.
Cool. All right. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you, Jake. Appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Doesn't look like we have too many people left on the line, but whoever is left, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here, but certainly feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions, and we'd love to talk with you. Thanks.